this was one other thing from the J.K. Rowling. I don't like this. There was a statement that she said vulnerable groups are being harmed. And the other side, which was, the trans community, talks about vulnerable groups being harmed.
Okay.
And I do get the sense that a vulnerable group being harmed is worse than a non-vulnerable group being harmed. Where the game that is played is it's all around the definition of who falls into marginalized or vulnerable, and then the harm of anything else can be excluded. And so the game that she's playing is, well, the vulnerable group of women is being harmed. And the trans community responds, well, the vulnerable group of trans people is being harmed. And nobody's willing to go like, how does this policy affect people on both sides? Can we step back and just like see the net impact of allowing trans people to go into the jail that they identify as, or to the bathroom that they identify as?
It's a sneaky adjective to put that in.
It's sneaky, and it's
very
one of those.
Sneaky.
It's so sneaky because, who cares? The statement "people are being harmed" is sufficient. Who cares if they're vulnerable? If they are being harmed, there's a problem. It would be a problem if the non-vulnerable
because
people
you're marginalizing the marginalized.
Harmed. If the non-marginalized are being harmed, that's just as bad. And what you get now, unfortunately, I think, is this: these terms were intended originally to point to a group of people whose harms had been overlooked in the past. Where you go, look, this is this vulnerable group. They constantly get stepped on, and nobody's counting. So that's a vulnerable group because nobody's counting. But if we are going to do the counting, which I don't think is happening in this case, like it becomes a way to exclude. You get to first define who your vulnerable group is, and then you get to exclude other people because we got to protect the vulnerable group. We got to protect the marginalized group. And I think that that's a bummer. It's a bummer, and it colors how, it's like J.K. Rowling sees this trans issue as one of misogyny, and it's like the idea of a trans man isn't really even spoken to or addressed in the entire thing, even though it's important, because the vulnerable people, her particular interest in women is overriding the consideration outside of that sphere of concern, is what I see. And it's not totally overriding. It is just relative. Like, this counts for more. Her demand is that we protect this more, these vulnerable people. And then they argue about who's the most vulnerable. And they go back and forth citing stats, not directly to each other, but it's just like you hear the tenor of the argument is who's in more danger. And it's, I sincerely believe that both groups deeply believe they are in danger. This is the last thing that I wanted to say, is that this was an interesting thing. That there was a discussion of power. ContraPoints is on the podcast. Do you know who ContraPoints is?
I do.
YouTube creator who is a trans woman with, I believe, a philosophy background. I don't know, but makes really good videos. Says that trans people generally in society have like very little power. And the one power that they do have is lashing out on Twitter. And so that's what they do. And as I reflected on this, I was like, it seems totally plausible to me that trans people feel, and maybe rightfully so, have very little local power. They can't make their dad or their mom accept them in the way that they hope. They can't get the medication that they may feel that they want. They can't make their social community accept them. But they seem to have very outsized power on the internet. Meaning, like, to make a rich person apologize, I don't know how I would do that. like where I don't know what I would do. In order to make J.K. Rowling respond to me and my group's interests. I don't know how I could possibly do that. And so there's this imbalance, which I think is unfortunately as a result of, I think if these people had and felt more local power, you would see less internet power. And it's like almost one follows the other. It's like when you don't feel power over your local life, your ability to dictate how you feel, how the people around you treat you, etc., you take to the internet
for a community. For the
form
same
a
thing.
community and can be part of mobs in some time that demand apologies or demand changes. And there is
Well, you go there to get what you're not getting locally.
yeah, and I think it's safe to say that it's tough to point to any, other than the richest people in the world, to any 0.6% of the population that have as much internet power as trans people do. As much power to make someone apologize, to be represented in a film or a thing, or to get the Academy to react in a certain way. A group that small, which is like, I point to like guys with micro penises. It doesn't seem to be able to get people to stop making small dick jokes ever. Mm-hmm. They're not banding together. They are definitely a group of people that have been teased, mocked, hurt. I'm sure feel a deep amount of shame. And it's interesting that, my guess would be, among other things, the lack of local power creates the push to exercise it on the internet.
Can you read the sentence again? Because were those contrapoints word? Because I thought the framing was an interesting framing as well. Or is this your summary of hers?
I just wrote contrapoint says, I that's close to a quotation, but it's something like that they have little or no power, and the one power that they have is lashing out on Twitter. That is not verbatim, but close to.
Yeah, okay. Sentiment. It explains some of it.
And she was saying, so that's what they do, is they go on Twitter and they lash out. And that's exactly what it is. When somebody feels contained in one area of life, that's the word. They lash out. They find one area where that pent up energy can effectively go, and they strike out in that direction.
Yes.
And
people aren't seeing it's also important, the audience isn't seeing the containment that's unfair in the background. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing maybe the lash out on Twitter and drawing a conclusion that this person is doing crazy things and saying crazy things and mean things and forming a mob, but that's because you're not seeing the contained part of their life where they're...
Well, and there are, there's that contained part of their immediate life, which I actually think that's the highest. If you could, as God, change one thing, you could change the laws that are being passed about trans people, or you could change the level of acceptance they have in their immediate 50-person community. I suspect that one would be the more meaningful for the wider majority of trans people. Not to say that the laws aren't deeply upsetting and something that they would still want to have an impact on, but that would be my guess, is that is the source of deepest pain, is your immediate circle of people around you.
Yeah.